Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Coffee Talk Tuesday. This is where we need our music line, right? We were talking about we need some music. Welcome everybody on Zoom. Welcome everybody on Facebook Live. We're back this morning. Where we need our music line, right? Oh, did anybody else hear that?
That was a little echo.
I don't want to hear myself talking back to me because that's going to make it really awkward for me for the next 20 minutes. Okay. I'm hoping that I figure that that's going to stop, and let's get started. So this morning, I want to just do a quick recap of what we talked about last week. So last week on our Coffee Talk Tuesday, we talked a lot about this next phase of time within the pandemic. So we've got school coming to an end, or distance learning coming to an end, and for those parents out there, hallelujah, if you're with me. Tomorrow's gonna be the best day ever, last day of school. So distance learning is coming to an end. Schools are closed for the summer. We've got extended school year for some of our students. We've got summer programs opening up and starting. We've got the state starting to slowly open up with phase 2 starting, a phase 2 of the opening starting tomorrow. So there's a lot of changes taking place that we were recognizing last week, right? And so we wanted to talk about that. We wanted to talk about what do we do, because the ultimate goal of this panel discussion is what can we do to support ourselves as professionals, as parents, as people? What can we do to support our employees? What can we do to support the families that we're supporting? What can we do to help provide support during this very difficult time that is extremely challenging? Because things are shifting, things are changing. People are starting to go out, and we know that parents are struggling. What do I do in the summer? What's going to happen in the fall? There's all these questions. So we wanted to set this stage of how can we better support ourselves and the people that we serve to kind of get ready for this. And so we talked about setting the stage for improving our own psychological flexibility, and so that we could be more successful within ourselves and for providing some support. And when we look at psychological flexibility, we talked about what is it that, when we did this chart, if those who are watching remember, we created this chart that has 4 quadrants. And in the first one, we looked at what is important to us, what do we value? And then in the second one, we looked at what gets in the way, what gets in the way of getting us to those important things, to those values. And then the next one is what do we actually do? What are the behaviors we actually engage in to kind of make us feel a little bit better, to get rid of those kind of bad feelings that we have? And then what are we committing to do moving forward? So to get us closer to what we value and what's important to us. And so we went through this whole exercise, and we really surrounded it around COVID and this next phase of the pandemic. So we went through this whole exercise, and we went off of live. And after every coffee talk, we debrief, and we sit and we talk about how did it go? What could we talk about next time? What do we think people who are listening are wondering, and how can we improve upon what we're doing? And within the first 2 minutes, it was Lisa who kind of said, I'm feeling a little uncomfortable that we kind of missed the boat on something big that's happening right outside of our tour. And she talked about, families that she's talking to, our IPPI families, very diverse from all walks of life, all colors. And we missed the boat on what's going on in the Black community, and with regard to systemic racism and equality, and the events of people, all people, lots of people of all colors protesting, wanting change, wanting things to be different. And we didn't mention that. We didn't talk about it. And so we all kind of sat there and looked at each other and said, whoa, that's a big deal. We did not acknowledge that this is having an impact on people. This is having an impact on our families. This is having an impact on us, and we didn't talk about it. So once we acknowledged that, I want to say, I think one thing that anybody who works with me or who knows me knows that one thing that I'll always say is, we're forever learners. Like, we can always do better. We can always be better. And the one day that if I ever say, oh yeah, I don't need to learn any more about that, then it's time for me to retire. It's time for me to quit, or time for me to do something else, because there's always room to learn. And we really learned something that day. We learned that we needed to take a step back, and in order to be the best that we can be, to support the families, to support ourselves, to support our families and the people that we're serving, we need to have a broader perspective, and we need to have other voices kind of help us to look at what's going on in total, not just one perspective, not just our perspective, but a shared perspective, and looking at our shared values and our committed action. And so we wanted to bring on some people from our community, in our IPPI community, to help us to take a closer look at the exercise that we did last week with improving psychological flexibility, because we believe that this is a very important topic. We all could use to improve our psychological flexibility, but I think I want to look at it through a little bit of a different lens, and have this shared experience where we can look at what our shared values are and what our committed action can be. So I'm going to stop talking and introduce, I'm very, very excited to introduce our guests, Vanessa Watkins and Brandon Kellum, who are both IPPI employees in our permanency department, working with children and families in our community. And so we asked them to join us, and we explained kind of what happened last week. And so thank you for joining us and, kind of supporting us in this. We all need to support each other, and we really appreciate it. So thank you guys very much.
No worries. My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having us.
And so what I thought, does anybody else have anything to add to what I just said? I know we all kind of had this conversation, and I don't want to, be the speaker of everything here, but before we kind of get started in our second phase exercise, does anybody have anything to add?
I just wanted to add, Dr. Liz, that first, it's amazing that you all can have that conversation last week, get off the call and reflect. And I think that's the first step to learning for anyone. You have to look within yourself and say, was there anything that we could have done better, done differently, analyze what steps you did take, and see how. And so to get off the call and immediately reflect and say, wow, there was a whole thing that we covered that's going on in our world that we didn't address, that you humble. And you need to applaud yourself there. Like, one of the things we need to be in this era is sensitive to ourselves, easy on ourselves. We're going through two pandemics.
Yeah.
Pandemics. And at the same time, while those two pandemics are happening, a lot of us that are parents are going through distant learning and teaching and working remotely and juggling. So I think just being easy on ourselves. So thank you for even just having that reflection and inviting us to the panel.
Thank you. Oh, thank you for acknowledging that we all have to be easy on ourselves. I think that was something we all talked about early on in this coffee talk, is that, we do all put a lot of pressure on ourselves, don't we? As professionals, as parents, as friends, as spouses, as, there's all of this pressure to be perfect. And we gotta let that go, right? I mean, and that's not easy. I know it's not easy for me to do. It's not easy for anybody to do, but anybody else have anything before we get started? All right, so what I thought we would do is kind of take a look at the chart that we did last week, and look at that, and have another conversation about the very same thing, and take a look at not just what's going on with regard to the pandemic, but what's going on with what's happening outside our doors with this call for change, and having this backdrop of the pandemic that's really kind of just infectious everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And which one do I want to do? I want to share this one. Is everybody seeing it?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And are you only seeing me? Are you
No.
seeing? Okay. So, and really, I want this to be a real interactive conversation. So jump in, whatever you guys are thinking. So I want to start with the lower right-hand side where we talk about what is important to us. What I have here is on the left page is what we worked on last week, and the right side page is what we're going to do together today. And so last week we talked about what is important to us related to this next phase of the pandemic and what do we value. And on the right side, I basically just said what is important to us, not just related to the pandemic, but what do we value. So what we talked about on last week, we talked about being educated with most current factual information. That is important to us. Giving children a fun summer while keeping them safe is important. Establishing connections and reconnecting in a safe way, and keeping ourselves safe, and self-care practices. So when we take a step back and we look at from a broader view, from a higher, from a different lens, what is important to us and what do we value?
So when I look at, I guess, let's say your first quadrant, when I look and see what do we actually do to get rid of the fear and anxiety around COVID in this next phase of the pandemic. And your second one of what gets in the way of getting to those important things that we value. When I look at those lists, and regards to what's happening today in our country, with the pandemic of COVID, and then the pandemic of dealing with our race relations in this system of systemic racism that has perpetuated itself for years,
Right.
I think I'm having the same reactions. I'm freezing. That's my, we have the fight, flight, or freeze. That's my first reaction. I freeze because just a lot of thinking gets setting in terms of physical activity, in terms of keeping myself motivated, not going into a depression or falling. I have that same reaction. So I've had friends, reaching out to me saying, hey, are you walking? Get outside, get out in the air.
Mm-hmm.
Avoidance. I do not. And that is one of the things that I actually do is avoid the news. I will not continue to keep feeding myself that over and over because it doesn't do well in my system. So when I'm looking at this, I'm having the same reaction to both. It's not just specific to the pandemic.
So let me take a step back, Vanessa, because you're talking, you got a little bit ahead of me in terms of all of those things. Can you talk to me about, bring that back to what's important to you? What do you value? So much and it's so important that it's causing you to freeze or causing you. So what are those things? What are those pieces? So just within this lower right-hand quadrant, what is it that you value that's causing those other things to happen?
So the things that I value that's causing that to happen is one, my family, my children, us being in different states. Will they lose their jobs? Are they going to be able to manage? How am I going to be able to care for them? Have my husband and I positioned ourselves in a place to be able to catch them? And how am I going to juggle both in regards to my son's education and keeping my job and dealing with if I want to go out to support the protests, how do I remain, keep us all safe when we're doing so? So all of those things rush to mind, which cause me to have those reactions.
And so what I wrote down was that family survival and safety, which really, one of the things that we talked about was giving children a fun, safe summer will keep themselves safe and keeping ourselves safe. So those are some shared values. And I think one thing that we kind of, that we didn't talk about with regard to safety is what you said about we have a lot of families that I know of that are going out and joining protests and participating in these kinds of things. And I'm sure there are a lot of questions about how can I do that in a safe way, right? Because that's something that's very valuable. And so it wasn't something that we touched on, and something that potentially could be an area that we could explore to provide some supports to people, right?
Yes, exactly. Like which protest, because there's a lot that's happening in communities all around. Which protests would be the ones that were probably the most educational and the safest to bring our children, to introduce them to what's happening around the world. So I think that's a start. I know that Lucked Up, and at that same weekend, it was a youth coalition organized protest. So there were a lot of children. There were a lot of youth out, my son's age and older. So kind of starting with, okay, so who is holding the protest? If it's a caravan protest, would that be safer for me to kind of bring my child out and participate as a family?
And Vanessa, I'm going to piggyback, because my point was going to be continuing the being educated with the most current factual information. And I think taking it a step further is sharing that information with our children to do that, because they're going to get the information somehow, and be the first people to share that information so that they know what we think is safe for them to hear.
Yes.
So I think that's the other piece of it.
What I like about the educational piece is because this is something that if you look at from an isolated lens, we can misdiagnose, the symptom, which means that we're going to respond in the wrong way. So one of the things I would like to add that goes right alongside with education is, so now you're educated, how do we respond to what's going on based off of the education that we got? What can we do? What's within my sphere of influence? What, am I to go out and protest, or am I to just use social media? Am I to, confront inequality and things that are unjust in my workplace? So based off of what what do you do?
That, you know what, that is a great one. And we didn't think about that as separate from the education. And I think it's really important too, because I think our responses, so you could be educated, but it's what you do with that education, right? So we can have all that information, but really having a good understanding about what your particular influence is super important.
Yeah.
So that's a great one. I love that one. Okay.
And that could, I think that could also, sorry, I know we're still in the lower right-hand quadrant, but I feel like that, keep that in mind for when we move to our committed actions. I think that's part of that too.
It will be. Well, and I think that it's going to be in both, right? Because if responding appropriately is important, if that's something that we value, is not just having the information, but ensuring that we have enough insight in ourselves and that we self-reflect. I think it becomes with all of that, that's a value, right? That is a value and a committed action. And I think maybe we would just kind of explore both. So maybe we put it in both categories. And I think we found last week we were playing with a couple of different categories for some of these things. So, and just for the sake of time, because this is going, and we're only in the first quadrant, let's go to the next quadrant. So what gets in the way of getting to those important things? So what is, in today's world, what is getting away of us having those things, being educated with the most factual information and responding appropriately, ensuring the safety of our children, ensuring the safety of our family?
I think the thing that comes to my mind the most, that Vanessa already touched upon, that we talked about last week, was that internet rabbit hole. Is there's too much information. So how do you know the best information to look at?
Yeah. And I, honestly, that's such a huge one for me with regard to the pandemic and with regard to what's going on with the, with the systemic racism that's currently happening right now.
Yeah.
I don't always know where to look to read and find good information, right? So that is something. So if you can start reading, and I had a doctor say to me once when I said, don't Google anything. If you're looking for it, you're going to find it. And so you can go through this rabbit hole. And if you don't find something that's factual or based in fact, I think Brandon, you touched upon this when we had a conversation last week where it's really easy to find things that are not true. And or not based in fact, or not things that you should be reading, and or you're taking somebody's opinion and then you're just kind of speaking that as opposed to finding some sort of a basis for it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I also think, to Brandon's point, what he said earlier is, you know, everyone is going to find the information that fits their agenda or whatever that may be. And so what do we do? So I get sucked into that social media rabbit hole, and, you know, you see the same people who you maybe care about as a person who continually post things that you're thinking you're not being open-minded, you're really looking for things to validate your own feelings. And maybe this circles back to what's our committed action, then how far do you go? Knowing that somebody's not open-minded. And I struggle with that, you know, and knowing that you're sitting there saying, this is wrong, this is just wrong. So having that courage, I think, to kind of speak up when appropriate, and not knowing, you know, I struggle with the balance of when do you back off because this person is not open-minded, clearly. And
well, and that goes back to our value of responding appropriately.
exactly.
Right? And it'll go back into our committed action. So what other things? So we have the internet rabbit hole. What else is something that's going to get into in the way of the things that we value?
I think for, go ahead.
I'm so sorry.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Oh, sorry. No, I think what Chrissy was saying kind of like resonated with me about a little bit of feelings of uncertainty that we've already kind of had in that category before. But, you know, kind of, you know, what she's saying about our response and, you know, how other people might respond, or, you know, is it safe to go out? And it's just kind of an uncertain time for so many different reasons. And we're kind of educating ourselves. So we want to make sure that we're responding in the best way. But I think someone else had said too, we're going to respond with, you know, what kind of fits with us. And as we educate ourselves, we're kind of responding in that way, but we're still kind of struggling with, you know, what's right, what should I do? At least I am.
Yeah, and I like what you're saying about what will other people think, right? What will other people think? Go ahead, Vanessa.
When I think of, you know, the discussion we had, you know, a little bit last weekend, some of the things that we are sharing now and sort of my journey between last week and this week, through educating, through sitting in some circles that people may have had a different view. I think the things that come to mind for me that gets in the way, and it's a combination of three of those, is, and I liked how you broke them out, but the fear, and not fear of contracting the virus, although that's there too in terms of, you know, but fear as to just not knowing, both on the pandemic and on, you know, what's happening with sort of this racial injustice, just fear of what is our future going to look like? Feelings of uncertainty. What should I do or shouldn't I do in terms of mobilizing and doing something? But there's definitely this feeling of I want to act because that's something I value, right? And then the confusion around conflicting information, and that's where my journey has been between last week and the weeks before. I definitely, as a person of color, of course, there's this feeling of, well, yes, I should advocate for my own race. At the same time, that I was feeling like, you know, I've shied away from those things for years because I didn't want to have such strong feelings. I wasn't this angry Black woman. But of course, there was some things that related just to my race. And I think hearing Brandon last week, hearing some other people, just made it real simple for me. And this is the information I stay along with now is, one, the human race. Right now, as a human race, we are hurting. If it's our sister or brother, and I was attracted to this pastor this week, Pastor Albert Tate, that was talking, and he called everyone siblings. And I was like, yes, right? At some point, I think we share all the same DNA. But he was saying my white siblings, my Latino siblings, my Asian siblings, and at different times, the world surfaces, one of those siblings are being hurt. And I said, I like this. I want to follow along this track. So right now, it gave me the okay. I can focus on Black and brown siblings right now, because right now they're hurting. And I can focus, just before, when the pandemic happened, on my Asian siblings, because in China, when this popped off, they were hurting. And so it gave me some clarity as to how I can channel my emotions and not feel like I was being biased one way or the other, but really being focused on to, this is hurting us all. And that's how I want to channel my conversation. So those were the things that got in the way for me, just sort of that confusion around that conflicting information, that feeling of uncertainty, like what should I do in terms of navigating that way? And then the fear of, you know, what could I say or do that's going to channel this in the right direction?
Mm-hmm.
I have to throw this out there, and I'll be real quick and real precise. And we talked about education, and based off what Vanessa said as well, empathy as well. I'm not quadrant that'll fall in. Me, I'm the type of person that, based off of raw information, I could begin to, you know, heart, but everybody's heart doesn't touch in the same way. And I think a lot of what's happening is it does become, you know, the Black community's issue, right? It gets framed in that way when we're not touching hearts, when we're not empathizing what happens. When we are able to empathize, we're able to attach to the emotion of what's happening, begin to realize that it's affecting all of us. It makes it easier to act, and it causes the education not to be sterile, but to actually be impactful.
And I think that fear gets in the way of that, Brandon. Would you agree?
100%, 100%. So many different dynamics of fear as well. Like there's another piece of fear that we didn't talk about. What if I'm amongst a community that feels contrary? What if through my education and then through empathy, my eyes become open? They're calling it being woke right now, right? Mm-hmm. Now I'm a woke individual, but my community is not. How do I begin to address? How do I move? How do I begin to have brave conversations? Fear can get in the way of that.
Fear does get in the way because people are afraid of saying the wrong thing, doing the wrong thing, feeling the wrong thing. It's, you know, even people who are genuine, right?
Absolutely.
There was an analogy. Go ahead.
No, I'm just wondering if we should put empathy in our, like,
values.
What value, right? That's a value. So if we start there.
Yeah.
Love it. All right. And so we have quickly, I mean, I feel like we could talk for 2 hours on this, right? And we could still be on quadrant 2. So I do want to talk, because I think that we got together, we talked a little bit last week, and I think we came up with we talked about some really great things with regard to committed action. And so I do want to spend a couple minutes before we close. And if we go over just a little bit today, I think that might be okay. Sounds
like a part 2.
Yeah, right.
I told you, Brandon.
But I do want to say, Vanessa touched on this upper left-hand quadrant already in the beginning when we and pipe in if you have something else, or but when we talk about what we actually do to get rid of the fear that's surrounding what's happening now, you talked about how sometimes you feel frozen and you don't know what to do, you don't know what to act. The fear gets in the way, as we were talking about. Sometimes we avoid these topics by doing things like binge watching or stress eating, or going into the internet rabbit hole. And sometimes we talked about physical activity, but Vanessa, to your point, it's the same, right? Mm-hmm. Those seem to be the same. So when we talk about our committed action, I want to talk just a little bit about education, because I think that is a shared value. And I think it's something that and we're all educators, we need to educate ourselves so that we can provide the best support that we can to others within our field, right? Because that's what we do. That's what we're here for. So talk to me a little bit about education. What is the committed actions around education, and how can we frame that in a way that's something that's doable or actionable for us, for all of us, not just us as me or us as you, but us as kind of collectively?
I think as a parent, for education for me, it starts at home, right? So I have spent a lot of time thinking about and talking to other people about how to best educate my children with the right information. I think we talked a little bit about this before, because they're going to be the next generation going out into the world, and they just have to get it better than us, right? So how do we do that? And I think from white, black, brown, you know, whatever we are, how are we making sure our kids just do better?
That's good. That's good.
And I think with that is experiences too. I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said, you know, sometimes it bothers her when we talk just about educating, because you can educate yourself, right? You could be educated, but really it's how do you immerse yourself in a meaningful way, so that our children are experiencing it, so that they can build that empathy. It's one thing to read about it or to be told about it or to watch a show about it. It's another thing to experience it and
Right.
to see with your own eyes kind of what's happening. And how do we do that? How do we have more of those kinds of experiences? Not contrived experiences, but real experiences. And I'm not just talking about protests and things like that. I'm talking about just having, you know, having all kinds of experiences where you're seeing differences, or you're seeing similarities, or you're seeing struggles, and being
That's
okay
good.
with that, and being comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah.
I think at the bottom line, it goes back to the old golden rule: treat others as you would like, right? And it does fall to, I was so impressed with Albert Tate. So I'm just going to quote him again in the story he shared. It was a great analogy, and I think it just helps us to make it simple. And he says, if there was two of us and we were related siblings, and, you know, we were getting abused every single day, or if we were getting certain things that we needed, our basic needs withheld from us every single day, but the other sibling wasn't. And finally years had passed, and that sibling came and said, hey, I know what's happening. I know it's not right. And I know that daddy or mommy should give you the same things I got. And then that sibling just goes back to sleep every night. You see, then there's something else that needs to happen. And I think if we look at both the pandemic and the racial divide as what's happening right now from that lens, we'll know what to do, because we know how we want to be treated and what's here. And I think that's the scope that we need to use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think our next step with all of this, right, is how can we support, how can we support our families? How can we provide some additional supports and resources to our families, and make it meaningful? And I think that's something that we're going to be working on over the next several weeks in terms of our committed action, is helping with providing supports and resources to our families who are struggling and hurting right now, because we have a lot of families who are.
That's good. And speaking of families, even just going through the quadrants, though, you know, we weren't able to fully flush it out because of time. I think individuals kind of like, you know, owning the personal values, confronting the fears within them, becoming educated actually begins to prepare you to have a conversation, a more full conversation with somebody who may be hurting or confused, or you're able to help guide them through it from a place of understanding.
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. I did add on here with our committed action, Brandon, your point of that being responsible with the information we learn. I think that is so important.
Maybe something else to add as well is, as you do that, is just being willing to have tough, brave conversations.
Yes.
Yeah.
It isn't easy. It isn't easy,
not.
but it's worth it.
Yeah.
Worth it. I feel like I feel like the inequality of all the isms is able to flourish within our countries because we, going back to the fear, we avoid, we buried our heads, we've not intentionally addressed it, and so now we're being put in a position, we're being exposed. We have to talk about this now, and learning on the fly. This is what, 2.5 weeks old. You know, we're all learning as we go. So committed action as well as to be patient.
I say that again. Committed action is what is
to be patient with each other, because we're all.
I love that. Ugh. Yeah.
I think too, kind of what you're saying, Brandon, I think like the education, like kind of how Liz started, is it never kind of stops. So I feel like, you know, okay, oh, I read something today, you know, I'm educated now. But I think it's, you know, you feel like you read something or you talked to someone and, okay, you did the right thing. But that never stops. And it's like every day you have those conversations and understanding that your committed action is to educate yourself, you know, forever. I think that's important.
Yeah,
And
to
I-
your point, when I think of my kids, what they've learned in school about racial inequality stopped in the 60s. Like that's pretty much where their education, that's where they stopped learning about it. It's nothing about anything that's happened more recently. So that's a great point, Michelle.
I also think, Liz, there has to be like, as individuals, we have to be willing to hear that maybe we said it wrong or did it wrong. There has to be this openness for, Vanessa, you made me laugh last week when we were talking. You said to me, you know, tell me if there's broccoli in my teeth. Like, I need to know. So the same kind of thing. I know I'm going to say things wrong. I know I'm not going to get it right. And I need people to tell me when I say it wrong and I don't get it right, because I don't want to keep saying it wrong. And so if we're not willing to be open about that and not feel hurt or feel embarrassed,
That's hard.
Will never change.
That is hard because you have to first establish safety and
Exactly.
people's motives for pointing out, and I don't care how gentle they can sound, pointing certain things out. It's something that we share as a knowledge, you know, and I know that this is crazy, but, you know, sometimes I think about the situation with Annie Cooper. That was something that everybody was aware of, but whoever spoke about those sort of things we know that could happen and go wrong. So yeah, you could have spoken, shared something with someone and said, you know, this is a bad point, but if there's no safety there and if actions prior showed different flow of who you are, there's not going to be a safety to receive from you.
Right.
And all of that is important too.
It's that whole idea of assuming blamelessness. So if we all assume blamelessness and somebody says something that's not right or something, and you tell them, if you're assuming blamelessness, it will be given and received in a way that is kind. But we don't all assume blamelessness, do we? I mean, I think that's one of the things that's problematic.
It's so hard.
It is very hard.
And listen, I'm gonna tell you something. So I had to go through my own journey of education. This wasn't something that was like taught to me as I was growing up in my home or at school. So several years ago, I had to get educated. Let me tell you, once I became, you know, understand what was happening, I was angry.
Yeah.
I had to go through my own process of forgiveness, you know, leaning on my faith and beginning to cleanse my heart. So where now I can assume blamelessness, I can assume good intent, I can have conversation without it becoming, you know.
Without getting angry. Yeah, without getting heated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean,
I think then that's where we write forgiveness, right? That what you just said, Brandon, that was the thing that jumped out at me the most, this forgiveness, because if we can't forgive, then it just, that anger just keeps going.
Yeah.
And so
I want to be right there with Brandon. I'm not there yet. I'm still on my journey.
It's all right. It's all right. Go back to the action. We said patience, right? So I'm being patient with you. You be patient with me. We'll get through this thing together.
that's right. Do I have patience in the committed action? I do, right?
Somewhere, I thought.
We talked about it, but I think it's.
Yes, you patient with ourselves too.
I do. Did I just write it twice?
Well, I think one is patience with each other and the other is patience with ourselves, which I think goes back to what Vanessa was saying though, about kind of like giving yourself a little bit of grace. And, you know, I feel like there are definitely things that I'm going to screw up. So, right. and so just being kind to ourselves wherever we are in our journeys.
You know, I think about, and I don't know where our time is, but I think about when I was learning, and I'm still learning in terms of sensitivity to the LGBTQ community, right? And I remember, you know, in the LGBTQ community, they have like like the rainbow. They have symbols and things like that, so you know, and it can identify members of the community. And I remember being at an event and I said, hey, you know, can we create an emblem for it means I'm still learning? So if I ask a stupid question
Yes.
and you see my emblem, you go, oh, okay, she's learning. I'm like, can we just get one universal? I'm still
To be
learning.
this.
I think we all need that. I think we
Yeah.
all need that in all walks of life. We need the I'm still learning. Because
Yeah.
And it identifies the ones that want to learn. Like, I want to learn it.
that's the difference.
Yeah.
There are those that want to learn and there are those that don't want to learn. All right. They're going to kick us off. So I am going to, I'm going to bring this to a close, even though this conversation is not over. This is just the beginning of this conversation in terms of being just kind of open and having a, as Vanessa put it, and I said earlier, a shared experience. I'm so happy to be talking to all of you and having this conversation. These conversations aren't easy, but it seemed pretty easy to me right now with you guys. So, and I just want to thank you all for supporting us, you know, in our reflection and moving forward. And we appreciate you very much for coming on and being with us. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us. Teamwork and partnership. That's how we get it done.
That is
That was fun. This was fun.
Oh,
Yes.
good. Yay. Fun. We like.
Hey, now you have to come back, Brandon.
I was going to say, careful what you say,
Yeah,
Brandon.
I think there's something going wrong with the internet connection.
You know? All right. And so next week, we're going to continue our conversation and talking about our shared values and committed action and looking at educating ourselves and providing some additional supports. So please send in some questions or ask questions, send some concerns, give us some, you know, some areas to explore for the next couple of weeks. And we look forward to talking to you then. Thank you both, Vanessa and Brandon, really, thank you both again. I'm so excited to be talking to you. And to the rest of you guys, we will see you all next week. Thank you.
Bye-bye.